Let's talk, to start with, about the original Watchmen. Some would say the real Watchmen, I don't know. What's your thoughts on the series now? How many years later?
Oh, it's got to be 26, something like that, I guess.
26 years later. As a sort of achievement, as a milestone in your life?
Yeah.
And
a millstone in my life.
A millstone in your life.
No.
And what you like about it now, what stands out to you, things maybe you think you could have done differently? Don't know.
Goodness me, where do I start on that? No, I mean, for a start, it's just amazing that Watchmen is still about and people are still interested in it all this time later. I can't really believe it. You know, as a creator, I couldn't be anything other than thrilled that people still want to look at my work, and that Alan and I, did something which is so well thought of by the fans of the medium we love. I mean, I am a comics fan. I got into the whole business because I was a big fan of comics, and to think that I'd worked on something which has become a landmark is something I'm incredibly proud of. You know, because probably there will never ever be a history of comics written that doesn't mention Watchmen. You know. So yeah, I'm still amazed that people like it. I'm very flattered when people say nice things to me. I'm not sick of signing copies of it, as some people seem to think. I'm not even sick of drawing Rorschach. It's been very good to me, and I'm just a lucky guy to have done it.
Are you surprised that there haven't been, since then, a great many graphic novels that anyone says is better than Watchmen?
Yeah,
if any, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I read a fantastic quote with Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, and they said to him, Joseph, you wrote Catch-22 25 years ago, and you've never written anything better. And he said, no, but neither has anybody else. So I suppose there's a slight aspect of that. I think we were very surprised at the time because it was almost like a kind of a golden year. Alan and I had done Watchmen, Frank Miller had done Dark Knight,
yeah.
Art Spiegelman had done Mouse, and the media were just full of this is the new thing, this is graphic novels. And it was a bit like being the first soldiers on the beach on D-Day. We arrived, we dug in, we waited for the reinforcements, and they never turned up. Or they came along in dribs and drabs, or things that looked like graphic novels but really just collections of comic books kind of turned up. I mean, there have been some fantastic graphic novels since then, some fantastic comic books. But I think a lot of our continuing fame was really that we were the first ones there. And we were also dealing with one of the stock areas of comic books, which is superheroes, in what was a very original way at the time, and in a way that the public could relate to, because they sort of knew about superheroes, and it was a way into the whole thing. And also to this day, people in comic shops, if they say, I'm interested in graphic novels, where should I start? Comic book retailers say, Watchmen's where you got to start. So I think, you know, it was good luck and timing that made us have that kind of stature.
Can we talk a little bit about the generation of various characters from Watchmen, because they were based on characters from another company that DC had bought, and they wanted to reinvent, but then it went off-piste and changed into something else. How did that happen?
Well, Dick Giordano, who was the managing editor of DC at that time, had previously worked at Charlton, and he had he was obviously very fond of these Charlton characters. And when he got into the position at DC, he wanted to buy the Charlton characters because he felt that they would extend the DC line. And I suspect that friends of his would be able to work on them, which would be good. And Alan had really made his mark on Swamp Thing, and they thought, hey, you know, maybe Alan could do something with these. And Alan, for a long, long time, ever since he was a kid, had this kind of story that he made up, originally featuring the MLJ characters, who were like the fly, like the web, I think, and the fly, yeah, and the Red Hood and everything. So he had this superhero murder mystery in mind that he repurposed for the Charlton characters. But then when they realised that he was going to kill some of the characters and do terrible things to the others, they said, well, maybe you won't do that with these things we just paid a lot of money for. And it wasn't so much that we substituted the Charlton characters or did new versions of the Charlton characters. We just realised that the Charlton characters, being second string characters as they were, and already quite derivative, gave us the perfect set of archetypes of superheroes. You know, there was the lone avenger, who was Rorschach. There was the millionaire playboy, Batman, which was Night Owl. There was the godlike Superman. So we suddenly realised that we actually had a set of characters with whom we could investigate the basic tropes of superhero comics. And it worked to our huge advantage because we didn't feel tied to any kind of continuity, and we were able to come up with backgrounds for the characters, backstories for the characters, and costumes and a look that was completely original whilst representing the archetypes. So that was tremendously liberating. The other liberating thing was when we decided that because of the presence of these characters, the world had changed. So that then meant that we weren't bound by making New York look exactly like New York looks, making the cars in the street look exactly like real cars, and the alternate universe in itself became a character.
Can we talk a little bit about the famous Alan Moore scripts? Because you've probably worked with the most famous of them all. And when you look at little samples of them, they look daunting, so incredibly long, so incredibly complicated, so many asides. When you're actually working from one of those scripts, is that actually a daunting prospect, or is it very easy to find the core stuff in there and to work out exactly what he wants from what he's said?
Well, the most daunting thing when you get a script is when you realise that the writer hasn't actually thought it through, when he's relying on you to kind of make good the gaping holes and the inconsistencies. The thing about Alan is he thinks everything through in huge detail. It all cross braces, it all relates, it all makes sense. And when he writes his scripts, what he wants to do is not leave anything out that you might find crucial or that might make the difference between understanding and not understanding. So he'll put everything in, and then he'll say, anyway, that's just my idea, feel free to ignore it. Most of the time he's spot on the money. Sometimes you would ignore it. I must say, when I write scripts of my own, I'm kind of the same. I think I don't want to leave any detail out that might be useful, but on the other hand, I don't want to tie the artist down. So the first thing I would do when I got one of Alan's scripts would be to read it very carefully, very carefully. Then I would go through it with a highlighter and just highlight what I needed to know, like, oh, it's a close-up or it's a long shot, and then who was in the picture, because sometimes it was confusing. Yeah. So I'd knock the whole thing into shape, and then I'd draw thumbnails, and then when I came to draw my final page, I wouldn't actually look at the script. So it was very much a question of editing and choosing. But it's a bit like going to a buffet or something. You know, if you've got a wonderful array of food, at least you can choose what you want. But if they've only got hot dogs and crisps, well, you know, that's less exciting. But I've never been daunted by one of Alan's scripts at all.
Can you think of anything specific that was in one of Alan's scripts that you thought, I can't do that, that won't work?
Well, the one that I always quote, and a lot of the things that Alan would put, I hope my voice is okay, it feels very ragged to me. A lot of the stuff that Alan would put would be actually to give you a mood or a feeling. And the one that I do remember was, I think it was some scene where Laurie is with her mum, Sally, in the retirement home, and they're talking wistfully about something. And Alan's put, we see the motes of dust dancing lazily in the late afternoon sunshine. Now, we all know what that means. We all sat in a room, but you can't draw all the motes of dust lazily, you know. But it was helpful to me, but there's no way in hell you're ever going to draw it.
Did you ever, while you were doing Watchmen, regret the very strict 9-panel grid that you'd established? Or did that work all the way through absolutely fine?
Well, no, I mean, that to me was... See, the thing was, Watchmen wasn't like any other comic, and I think still there is no other comic like it. And I wanted every page of it to distinctively be from Watchmen. In other words, you wouldn't confuse it with any other comic. It didn't look generic. It didn't look like it was set in any particular time period. And what was happening in comics at that time was people were doing a lot of what I would call kind of poster layouts, where they'd have a big shot, which was exciting and full of action, and lots of smaller shots so you could see what was going on. So I proposed to Alan that we did it on a 9-panel grid, because then it had a formality to it, and it was always going to look unique. And of course this was a wonderful gift to him, because it meant he could know exactly what was going to be on each page, exactly what size each picture was going to be. And it's really interesting, you know, it is a maxim that artists sacrifice. So by sacrificing the ability to go big on pictures, when you did come to a big picture, even if it was only twice the size of the rest of the pictures, it looked really big. And when we got to the last issue, which we always knew we were going to have full-page pictures, the full-page pictures just looked vast. So it was a very deliberate thing, and we didn't ever feel restricted by that. It was actually one of the things that made Watchmen what it is.
Soon after Watchmen, or fairly soon after Watchmen, you worked with Frank Millar, the other great writing talent of that period, I guess, on Give Me Liberty and then the Martha Washington books. How was that a different experience, and how did that go?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a completely different experience. Frank's way of working is very different from what Alan would do. You know, the comparison that I always make, and it does still seem apt to me, is like if they were musicians, Alan would be kind of Mozart, and Frank would be like Miles Davis. You know, he'd be that kind of jazz improvisation. And with an Alan script, from the very beginning, every page was set, every picture was set. With Frank, I'd draw some, he'd look at it, think, oh, we'll put another panel in there, or another page, or oh, we'll expand this to be the whole last half of the book. So it was exciting from that point of view, that it was never fixed until the last moment. Right. So it was a different experience, and I also deliberately did it in a much more expansive way. I wanted to get away from the 9-panel grid, so the pictures... Talking to the microphone, okay. You think I know that by now. So I mean, I deliberately did that in a much more expansive, free-form, dynamic kind of way. And it was great. It was a completely different kind of story. It wasn't a superhero story, which would have been a disaster after Watchmen and Dark Knight to do another superhero story. We went on to do Martha for many, many years. I think we actually spent about 15 years before we got to the end of her story, and that story is now complete. And it was a really good experience, completely different than Watchmen, much less structured, but everything's got its pros and cons.
Can we talk a little bit about The Originals, which is a graphic novel that you did a few years ago now, which I very much liked and seemed like it was a very personal work to you, a sort of mods and rockers in a strange near-future fantasy world, I suppose. How did that come about? How much is that based on your upbringing or your youth? And I believe there's some news with it going on now as well.
Well, yeah, Karen Berger, who's the editor-in-chief of Vertigo, had been saying to me for a while, Dave, you know, you've drawn all this stuff that other people have written. You've written loads of stuff that other people have drawn. You really should write and draw something of your own. And I thought, yeah, I should, but I don't want to just do another superhero story or another science fiction story. I want to do something that's got a particular meaning to me. And I thought, I was driving in my car one day, and a guy came past me on a motorbike wearing a leather jacket. And, you know, I'm a respectable middle-aged man without prejudice. And I muttered under my breath, fucking Grease. Because when I was growing up, I was a mod. I had a scooter, I had the clothes, I listened to the music, I did all that stuff. And I thought, that's really interesting that after all these years, I still have this gut feeling of dislike and hatred for this guy on a motorbike. That might be worth exploring. And I suggested it to Karen, and she said that could work really well. And when I came to write the story, I realised that there were so many things that had actually happened to me that I could weave together into this story. And the stuff at the very beginning of the originals, our heroes are standing on a street corner, and these guys come up on these hover scooters, and I made them hover scooters because actually a big guy on a little Vespa does honestly look a little bit silly. But if it's a guy on a floating chrome bike from Mars, he looks kind of exciting. And the scene where they come up on these scooters and they say to our two young heroes, like, where can we find the grease? And they go, well, they don't actually go. They say, well, we know where they are, but we're going to come with you, and they beat them up. In my case, I've been standing on my local high street, and the Boreham Wood scooter boys had come up and said, hello, mate, and they knew I was their mate because I had a parka on. They said, where can we find the grease? And I said, oh, they've just gone round the corner. They said, all right, thanks very much. And they went round and beat the shit out of them. Yeah. And to this day, I'm proud of that, and I shouldn't be. So I adapted that for the book. And there's all sorts of things where our two heroes nearly get beaten up. and the girl they're with tells the grease to piss off and all this. That actually happened to me. I actually had to change it for the book because people would never have believed that they would have gone just because a girl told them to. So that was quite close to my heart, and I did get an Eisner Award for it, which was such a relief, because when you're working on something on your own, you spend 2 years in a room, nobody to talk to about it, you lose sight of whether it's good or bad, and the fact that at the end of the day, at least the people who do the Eisner Awards thought it was good was some kind of validation. But what I'm really excited about now, because it is something that I own, it's a creator-owned book, which kind of, because it's the story of my life, I'm really glad that I do own the story of my own personal life. I'm investigating ways of getting it onto digital media, because obviously music is an important part of it, sound is an important part of it, and actually the fact that it's in black and white makes it very distinctive graphically. So it may well be that before very long I've got the originals out there again, and hopefully I think it's a story and it's got a look to it that hopefully the general public would find quite appealing.
And what would a digital version of it be like? How much would it be what we see now in the existing graphic novel on a different medium, and how much would it change?
Well, the basic story and the images would be the same, but I think there's things I can do to manipulate the images and do with the pacing of the story and the way the story's broken up and the way that music is used and the way that sound is used, that I think can make it just seems a perfect candidate for that kind of treatment, because it is about music, it is about style. I've just got a feeling that it can have a whole new lease of life.
Tell us about the new project with Mark Millar, the Secret Service. What stage is that at? What's it like? What's it about?
Well, the Secret Service, it's basically an espionage book. It's like a spy story. It's kind of James Bond, Man from U.N.C.L.E. territory. Mark and I have wanted to work together for a long time. In fact, as we've said elsewhere, Mark wrote me a fan letter when he was about 16. And I just finished doing Watchmen, and I got this letter, and it said, "Dear Mr. Gibbons, I really enjoy Watchmen, and I think that the most important thing for you to do next in your career is this story that I've written. So here is the story. Please let me know when you can start on it." And I've got no memory of it. I don't know what the story was like, whether it was good or bad. I mean, it was written by a 16-year-old, so possibly it needed a bit of work on it. But I wrote him back a very gracious no thanks letter and sent him a sketch. And he has never forgotten this. And I've watched his career grow from the early days of doing Superman Adventures, which was very straightforward, kind of juvenile market versions of Superman, until he was working on the Ultimates, which was a real fanboy experience for me. It's weird how things can change round. And it was one of those few comics that I'd phone my local comic shop up about and say, "Is the latest Ultimates in? I really need the latest Ultimates. When's it going to be in?" And so at some point we must have met up again, Mark and I, and said, "Wouldn't it be great to do something together?" And what he came up with was Secret Service, which was kind of a bit left field, because I thought we'd maybe be doing some kind of hero book or science fiction book. But it just feels right, because it's a genre that is neglected. It's a genre with lots of possibilities. It kind of is a little bit in originals territory as well, because it's about the realities of living in a sort of a pretty crummy end of society, and pressures within families. It's a guy, the kind of spy figure. He's the uncle of this kid who's just turned 18, and he's obviously headed for a life of petty crime and unwanted pregnancy, and he feels an obligation to rescue him from that. So it's got a real kind of emotional heart to it, and the fact that it's set in present-day Britain means that it's got a relevance to it, and it's a real challenge to draw, because it's easy to draw aliens and Supermen and stuff like that. It's a lot more challenging, and as with, it's got all the things that I really love in Mark's work, which is wonderful characterization, outrageous humour, and a genuine feeling of excitement and adventure.
And how many episodes is it? When's it published?
Well, the first story arc is going to be 6 issues. The first 2 are out already, and it's been great. I've been signing them. Things exist in your mind for so long, and then all of a sudden they become real. You're at a convention and somebody's giving you a copy to sign. First 2 issues are out. I'm a good way into the 3rd issue, so hopefully that's not far behind. and we should be finished by, September or so.